Here in the German state of Saxony-Anhalt, the far-right Alternative for Germany party could come to power for the very first time in German post-war history. Regional elections on the 6th of September will decide whether the AfD isn't just polling strongest, but whether it can actually clinch a majority. I speak to Sven Schulze, the current Conservative state premier and the CDU's top candidate. His task is to stop the rise of the AfD to power. I asked him why he recently even disobeyed the Chancellor, his own Chancellor, in an attempt to do that, and why he recently even sounded similar to the AfD when it comes to German citizenship.
Mr. Schulze, you've been tasked with fulfilling what Chancellor Merz promised, keeping the far-right AfD out of power here in Saxony-Anhalt. The polls aren't looking good for that right now. Just a few weeks before the elections, your CDU is at 27%, the AfD stands at 41%. Can you still turn this around?
Right now, nobody has a majority here. The AfD, which wants to govern alone, doesn't have one. And neither do I, with the coalition we're currently in, the so-called Germany coalition. So right now, we're fighting for every single vote. That's why the campaign's so intensive. Going forward, our focus is on issues that matter to Saxony-Anhalt. I hope the election campaign will be a little less overshadowed by Berlin and Berlin-centric issues. And I'm optimistic that on October 6, people here will do what I know them for. People vote for people. Political labels are losing importance. It's more now about who people trust to lead this state. As state premier, I'm out and about across the state every day. From what I hear and sense in conversations with people, many are yet to make up their minds. That's why we're campaigning so intensely now.
Now, as you say, you want to keep Berlin politics out of your campaign, but things are happening. In Leipzig airport, right at your doorstep, we recently had an incident with explosive materials attached to a drone, a narrowly averted disaster. What was your first thought when you heard that, and who's behind it?
That's up to the authorities to determine, if they indeed can. What it does show, however, is just how serious the threat is, also of threats posed by foreign powers. I believe that's how the Federal Interior Minister described it. And it shows how quickly something like this can happen. It shows not only that we may be under observation by other states, but also that we could be targeted through these kinds of means.
Why is everyone so reluctant to name suspected countries? Recently, we also saw a package explode on the ground in Leipzig. There was reliable evidence suggesting Russia was likely behind it. Don't you think this could be the case here as well?
I'm convinced that it's always best to rely on the findings of the authorities. Even in the earlier case, it took time for a conclusion. As I remember, those were explosive devices hidden in DHL parcels. And eventually it was said that Russia may have been responsible if the evidence was found. The same applies here. There are suspicions, but it's important that those suspicions are confirmed. I do believe that there are forces in this world that do not want Germany to succeed, and that want to create uncertainty in the population. What we saw in Leipzig was a very serious matter. And the drone wasn't found just anywhere. It was discovered at the location where Ukraine's 4 Antonov aircraft are stationed. I'm sure every effort will be made to determine where the drone came from and where the packet originated.
Leipzig's a major hub for supplying Ukraine.
It's one of DHL's most important hubs in Germany. For us, it's our airport here in central Germany, and it was certainly shocking to see how our infrastructure is being targeted.
How concerned are you about hybrid threats from Russia? There's a lot of disinformation, and I'd like to show you a clip that you've probably seen in which you and your wife are accused of misappropriating funds. Now, it's been proven that this is a fake video. Deutsche Welle has had similar experiences with entirely fabricated stories labeled DW about Chancellor Merz planning to resign. How big is the impact on this election campaign?
First of all, I'm grateful that the media are reporting on this issue and exposing the fact that disinformation is being spread deliberately and demonstrably also from Russia. Images are being manipulated, edited together artificially, and used to influence elections, such as those in Saxony-Anhalt, Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania, and Berlin. It's an extremely serious issue. Artificial intelligence is making it increasingly difficult, or in some cases impossible, to distinguish between what is real and what is fake. Voices can now be replicated relatively easily, and in ways that are almost impossible to detect. They can then be used to generate statements that politicians never actually made. This is an entirely new level of threat. And unfortunately, we are seeing it in this election campaign.
The polls also show considerable dissatisfaction, particularly in Eastern Germany. More than 50% of people feel they aren't getting a fair deal, that they're not adequately represented in society. Around 70% of AfD supporters say exactly that. So that's clearly the breeding ground for the AfD, the party you're competing against. How do you plan to change that?
What's important is that people in Saxony-Anhalt see they have a state premier in me, Sven Schulze, who doesn't give in to a storm. When I stand up for issues that matter to this state and encounter resistance, I don't back down. I say these are the issues people care about. Freedom of expression is also a major issue, and I say freedom of expression belongs to everyone, not to a single party as the AfD claims. Those are the issues we need to discuss. Let me be clear. There are no issues that belong to political parties. There are only issues that belong to the people. In my view, many parties made a mistake in the past by avoiding certain topics because they feared discussing them that might benefit the AfD or others. That is not how I see politics, and that is not how I campaign.
Forming a government in Saxony-Anhalt will be difficult unless the AfD wins an outright majority and can govern alone. The AfD has been classified as right-wing extremist, although legal proceedings are still ongoing regarding whether that classification will eventually be upheld. Among other things, it wants to reshape education along more nationalist lines, whatever that eventually means. At the same time, it positions itself against the churches. While invoking Christian values, it argues that churches should be kept out of politics and questions their funding. What will be your response to that?
Obviously, we need to debate these issues more openly. In the past, we didn't discuss political issues enough. That's not the case in this campaign. You've raised issues that are fundamentally important to Saxony-Anhalt. Take education policy. The AfD effectively wants to abolish compulsory schooling. They've implied that
they want homeschooling.
Exactly. The idea is that those who can afford it would educate their children at home, while everyone else would attend public schools. They want children with disabilities to be separated from mainstream classrooms and taught in separate classes. They want children from migration backgrounds removed from regular classrooms altogether, instead of finding sensible solutions and allowing children to simply be children. These are experiments on our schools. They would restrict the students who get the Abitur to 25%. They argue that this reflects the number in academic secondary schools. But in Saxony-Anhalt, there are many ways of getting the Abitur, and way more than 25% of kids get it. The AfD would cap that. That's why I say no experiments in our schools. And what happens if you abolish compulsory schooling? In the end, it's the women who would be expected to stay at home and care for the children. The party platform also talks about increasing birth rates. So that means women should simply stay at home and raise children. That is a view of women that I do not share, and neither do the women in Saxony-Anhalt. It's a key point in the AfD manifesto, phrased a bit nicer than that, but it's there. Another point, ours is a comparatively old state, with an average age of 48.3 years. For every 2 people leaving the labour market, only 1 person is entering it. even if every unemployed person in Saxony-Anhalt found work tomorrow, we would still face labour shortages in many sectors. That means we need workers from abroad, particularly in healthcare, hospitals, nursing and agriculture. The AfD refers to these people as culturally alien and says it no longer wants them here. In effect, it would turn Saxony-Anhalt into a place where people who were not born in Germany are no longer welcome. It cannot be our aim to cut ourselves off. A state like Saxony-Anhalt relies heavily on exports and on cooperation with countries, companies, and people around the whole world. There are many issues worth debating in this campaign. What I don't want is what the AfD wants, a return to a time we've long since left behind. When AfD members sing the former East German anthem at party events, it shows they want to return to that era. I don't want us to build walls around ourselves again, as we've had before. People don't want that, neither do I. I want us to remain a free society where people can make their own decisions. And finally, let's not spend all our time talking about the AfD. Let's talk about Saxony-Anhalt's achievements and its future.
You just raised the issue of migration yourself, and at one point you sounded surprisingly similar to the AfD when discussing the alleged attacker at the Berlin Pride event. He was of Lebanese descent, born and raised in Germany, and radicalized here as well. You said you didn't want such people in this country. What does that mean in practice? How do you then define citizenship? It sounded more like citizenship based on ancestry than on birthplace.
I'm grateful you brought this up, because I want to be very clear. When people reject this state, reject our democratic system, become radicalized, and are ultimately classified as security threats, then we have a problem. I've said that if someone is classified as a security threat and holds dual citizenship, then we should discuss revoking German citizenship. If someone is a threat to our country and its people, and may even intend to commit acts of terrorism here, and they hold another nationality, it's a legitimate discussion to have. However, that did not apply to the Berlin attacker at the Berlin Pride, because he did not possess dual citizenship. I wasn't aware of that at the time. I'd received incorrect information, and that led to, admittedly, a somewhat misleading answer on my part.
Finally, you've effectively campaigned against your own chancellor, against Chancellor Merz, by joining two other conservative CDU state leaders in opposing a key element of the proposed pension reform, scrapping retirement at 63 after 45 years of contributions. Without going into detail, do the Chancellor's historically low approval ratings mean you need to distance yourself from him? He's currently scheduled to appear in your campaign just twice. So will he even attend?
Hat ja nur 2 Termine bei Ihnen im Wahlkampf und wird die tatsächlich überhaupt wahrnehmen?
First of all, I'm not distancing myself from the Chancellor. Nobody is doing this for campaign purposes, despite claims to the contrary. And I'm not opposing the Chancellor. It's about the issue and about principle. An expert panel has proposed something that we take issue with. It's not about retiring at 63 as such. It's about letting people who have paid into the pension system for 45 years retire without deductions, at least for certain generations. We're hearing this concern everywhere, not just in Saxony-Anhalt. Let me tell you about this. In 2025, 36% of those who retired early in Saxony-Anhalt accepted reduced pensions, often because they felt physically unable to continue working long enough to meet the full contribution requirements. So this is an important issue for us. I get a lot of backing from Eastern Germany, and I also get a lot of pushback, especially from Berlin. I understand both views, but my job is not to impose Berlin's priorities on Saxony-Anhalt. My job is to bring Saxony-Anhalt's concerns to Berlin and fight for them. My idea of politics is simple. Listen to people, understand their problems, and solve them. That applies to pensions as well.
The issue has arguably put a dent in what the Chancellor calls his overall package. Is there room for compromise? Other countries have solutions for this as well. In Austria, for example, people who've worked for 7 years in particularly strenuous jobs get special retirement provisions.
I've always believed there's room for compromise, but right now isn't the time. Berlin's in summer recess and there's no draft legislation on the table. The federal government has expressed its position, which I fully respect, but we've seen that almost all the East German states take a different view.
And finally, you've personally committed to ruling out any cooperation with the AfD, despite many in your own party in Eastern Germany disagreeing on this. You've also ruled out cooperation with the left. Might you reconsider after the election results of September 6th are out?
I stand by what I've said. No member of the AfD or the left will sit in my cabinet. But right now, the challenge is that nobody has a majority. That's what we're campaigning for. Every day, for another month, we've got the opportunity to talk and discuss with people the issues that matter to them. And finally, to focus on Saxony-Anhalt's issues. That's my goal in the coming weeks and the way to achieving a good result. I trust the people. And once again, people vote for people. Party labels matter less and less. Trust in the individuals who carry responsibility matters more and more. I'm counting on the people of Saxony-Anhalt to use the opportunity between now and September 6, whether by postal vote or by voting in person, to ensure that Saxony-Anhalt is not turned upside down. I want us to remain a state that is outward-looking, connected, European in outlook, and one that embraces opportunities instead of constantly looking backwards. That's what I'm fighting for.
Sven Schulze, many thanks.
Vielen Dank.